I never wanted to go on that stupid hike in the first place. Yet there I was, hiking cabin to cabin in the Norwegian mountains with my class. Whoa, right? For a misanthropic misfit like myself, it was a nightmare. Let's just say I do best behind my computer, talking to people over a microphone, not actually having to make eye contact. I tried getting out of it, but my parents weren't having it. They thought the fresh air would do me good. Let me assure you it did not. The first 2 days went mostly as expected. Me at the very back of the group, one of the chaperones occasionally trying to make awkward small talk and half-hearted encouragement, and my classmates largely ignoring me. Surprisingly, the hiking was actually almost enjoyable. The scenery was breathtaking. Misshapen, warped birch trees were scattered over the yellowing grass and the browning heather. Mountains rose on both sides, looming ominously. I thought I could even have liked it if only my classmates weren't. Like this, I somehow made it to day 3. By the end of it, I was lagging pretty far behind. The amount of physical activity was far higher than what I was used to, and it started getting to me. When I finally spotted the last cabin, the sun had set, and we were hiking by that gloomy blue half-light that lingers after the northern sun sets. It looked huge, imposing in the distance. The cabin actually was a set of cabins, a campground, and a rather large main house. I bet it could house 100 people if it had to. It looked out of place there, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the mountains. By the time we finally got there, the rest of the group had eaten dinner, and were hanging out in common area. I got to eat with the teacher, who had to hang back to make sure the rear, i.e. me, made it all the way, which is how I learned that the place was closed for the season, so only our group of 30 or so teenagers were sleeping there. Our teacher knew the people who ran it. He had organized it so that they'd just drive in with food for us and leave us to it. So there we were, about 30 kids, 2 teachers, in the vast, empty space of the mountains and valleys. I didn't want to interact with the others, and I wanted to be asleep, or believably pretending to be asleep, when the rest of the guys I'd share my room with went to bed. I was exhausted, a little embarrassed by how slow I had been, and as it turned out, completely without a cell signal, so staying up had nothing for me. I headed straight to my room and promptly fell asleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up in a panic. The room was pitch black. Usually our rooms weren't that dark. These places never managed to keep the light out completely. Light would seep through from the hallway, the moon would shine through a gap in the curtains, some red light would be blinking on some appliance. Something would pierce the darkness. But this one was pitch black. I was sure someone was in the room, standing above my bed, looking at me. You know, one of those silly things you think of. My breath caught in my throat. My heart beat like crazy. Thought I laid there for what felt like hours. Nothing happened. Of course, nothing happened. I tried to talk myself down in my head. I was being silly. I was safe. There was just miles and miles of empty woods and hills around here where anything could be hiding, could have followed us, could have seen us defenseless, alone. No! You're safe. Don't be silly. I wanted to turn on the light, but I didn't want to piss the others off. But I really wanted to turn on a light. As a sort of compromise, I decided to go to the bathroom. It meant I could turn on the light in the hallway and sneak a peek back into the room. I sat up, swung my legs off the side of the bed, and felt around for my shoes. I put them on and snuck out the door and flicked the switch in the hallway. I glanced back into the room. Nothing there, of course. I just had to make sure. I walked down the hallway until I found the bathroom. The air was freezing. Someone had left a window open. Ha, I thought. Someone took a shit. Nice them the air out, I guess. But when you leave a window open in Norway, in the mountains, in the middle of October, at night, it gets really, really cold. I did my business and walked over to the window to close it. Not that I cared about those other idiots. They could freeze in the morning for all I cared. But still, you just don't leave windows open when it's cold out. As I went to close it, I looked out the window and caught a glimpse of the night sky. It was covered in stars, and there, right above the nearest mountain, a vague green blob was materializing. Northern lights? This far south? My heart almost stopped. I had never seen northern lights in my life. We hardly ever get them as far south as where I live. So I tiptoed back into my room, grabbed my phone and my coat, and headed out into the fall night. For a second, I debated whether I should wake the guys. They'd probably love seeing the northern lights just as much as I would. Screw them, I decided. Not like they'd wake me up if the tables were turned. Frost covered the ground, glittering in the strange green light from the sky. It was the northern lights, not particularly strong, not very defined, but undeniable still. Nothing else turns the night sky green like that. I stood there, staring at the sky, freezing for hours. The fear from earlier had completely gone. I stood there, so small, so insignificant, under the stars and the strange green light that flickered across the skies, completely mesmerized. Finally, my whole body started shaking, and I realized I was freezing. I had to go back inside, no matter how beautiful all this was. My eyes had adjusted to the dim light from the outside, so I snuck down the corridor without turning the lights on. I knew the bright light would blind me, and I didn't want to burn out the beautiful memories of the aurora to replace it with the grim fluorescent light that lined the hallway. I used the light on my phone to identify my room, and turning it off, snuck back into my warm bed and promptly fell asleep. I woke up with a start and groped around on the floor for my phone. 10:30 it read. Shit, I overslept. Breakfast was at 7:30. We were supposed to be hiking by 9. I jumped out of bed, almost hitting my head on the bunk above me. Why hadn't anybody woken me up? The blinds were still down. The room was dark. I opened the door. The corridor outside was dark. The whole place was quiet. I flicked the light switch. The power was out. A chill ran down my spine. Was something wrong? The room was dead quiet. No snoring for the boys. I was clearly the only one there. Questions trudged through my sludgy morning brain. Was it some sort of prank? Leave the weirdo behind? But the teachers wouldn't have gone along with it, would they? Did they forget about me? The slow burn of worry started in my gut. I was all alone in the wilderness. All that empty space. Wait, no, there was a road. I had my phone. Someone could come get me. I wasn't lost. I was just forgotten. Actually, they probably hadn't even left me behind. Maybe there was a storm or something. Maybe the hike was canceled. I yawned. Even if they had left me, it just meant that someone would have to come get me and I didn't have to hike the last leg of the trip. Fine. I grabbed my jacket, put my feet into my shoes, and set off to find some people or some food. Preferably both. I was still half asleep as I shuffled into the dining room. I registered that it was also empty. Breakfast was clearly over, as the teachers had promised it would be. I was hungry, though. I crossed my fingers that I'd find some leftovers in the kitchen. I pushed open the door with the staff-only sign, shuffled across the linoleum floor, opened the fridge, and to my delight found it still full. The pantry as well. I made myself a sandwich, and my mood improved considerably. I might be left behind, but I was left behind with food. It wasn't all bad. I munched on my sandwich while considering what to do next. I went to make a second one when it occurred to me that there was a lot of food there. Like, too much. This was all the food we would have needed for the breakfast. The others hadn't eaten. The uneasy feeling came back. Why would they have left without eating? It made no sense. Unless something had happened. Again, I thought of the vast wilderness, of the lonely road, of everything that could be hiding in the mountains. In the house. In the rooms. God, no. There were so many rooms, empty cabins, empty spaces, closed doors. Closed doors with God knows what behind them. I should have checked the rooms. Why hadn't that been my first move? Because I didn't want to. I thought of opening all those doors, finding them all empty. Or worse yet, not finding them empty. The fear started growing within me. I knew I had to do something and do it before I was totally paralyzed by panic. So I gathered all my courage, got to my feet, and left the kitchen. The sound of my steps rang out to the cavernous dining room. They seemed so much louder now. My heart was pounding by the time I tiptoed down the dark hallway. The only window was at the far end, and the sky was covered in clouds. It didn't do very much to light up the corridor, and it did nothing for my fear. I found myself stopping outside my room. I already knew it was empty, but I still wanted to check there first. Maybe because I was so sure it was empty. It felt like a safe place to start. Or maybe because deep down I knew something was very, very wrong. The blinds still kept the room completely dark, so I couldn't see anything there. I crossed the room in 2 long strides. What little daylight seeped through the gray sky would still be a welcome friend in the quiet gloom. I tugged at the string and jumped a little as the sound of the curtain rolling up rang sharply throughout the empty room. I turned around. To my great surprise, Peter, one of the guys, was lying in his bed opposite mine, clearly fast asleep. Relief flooded through me. I wasn't alone. "Peter," I croaked. I cleared my throat. "Peter!" I repeated a little louder. No response. It occurred to me that it made no sense that he was still here. There were so many reasons why he should not be asleep in his bed right now. And he looked oddly, still. I took a step toward him. "Peter," I whispered, heart beating in my throat. I reached out, grabbed his arm under the covers, and shook. No response. He seemed totally dead. The thought hit me like a ton of bricks. Dead? No. No way. Absolutely not. He couldn't be, no. I forced my shaking hand towards his neck to feel for a pulse. My fingertips made contact with his icy skin, and I knew instantly, dead. Nobody alive can be that cold. He had been dead for hours. My knees gave out under me, and I crashed to the floor. Peter was dead, just lying there. Next to me, he had been dead this whole time. I had walked in and out of the room. I had eaten breakfast. He had been dead the whole time. Oh, God. I vomited on the floor. Somehow I made it to my feet. I had to check the other bunk. I had to find help. I couldn't be here all alone with a corpse. The other bunks weren't empty either. The 2 other boys in the room were as cold and as dead as Peter. I only remember bits and pieces from the next few hours. I recall running wildly down the hallway, tearing open doors. Not all of them were unlocked, but the ones that were revealed more dead bodies. Everyone, all the rooms. They were all stone cold dead, and I was all alone. I think I screamed a lot because my throat hurt like hell when I finally entered a sort of catatonic trance that could be construed as calming down. It could have just been the vomiting, though. I'm fairly sure it happened multiple times. I was lying in a fetal position at the end of the hallway, outside my dead teacher's room. I was shaking convulsively. I had no thought for my own safety. I had given no consideration to why they were dead. All I knew was that I was alone in a house full of dead people. I don't know what part of me kicked into gear, but finally it occurred to me that I should call the police. That's what you're supposed to do when people are dead. You call the police and they take care of it, except I didn't have reception. The part of my brain that was still running some sort of script figured I should go for a high point. There was a hill behind the hostel. I grabbed my phone and started hiking. It took me exactly 2 hours and 37 minutes to get a single bar on my phone. At this point, my battery was down to 4%, and my panic was back to about 97%. I typed 112 with shaking fingers and prayed as the phone rang. No battery, send people to the hut. They're dead. They're all dead. Please, please, please. I managed to yell to the operator before the phone died. I shook the phone helplessly. I turned it back on. Light flickered across the screen, that stupid opening graphic. I frantically typed in my PIN, pressed the phone icon, typed in 112, and watched the phone turn itself off. I stared disbelievingly at the useless piece of technology in my hand. My only hope was that they got the message. Had I said the name clearly? Would they believe me? Did it sound like a prank call? I stood there until the sweat on my back chilled me to the bone, and I realized I needed to get moving. I wasn't going back into that tomb, no way. I decided I would go back down and follow the road. And only then did it occur to me to wonder why they were dead. You'd think that'd be the first thing on my mind, but it wasn't. Only at that moment when I was freezing cold, my last piece of technology, my last avenue of communication gone, it occurred to me. What the hell had happened? Had something done this? Should I be dead too? Should I hide? I went over the morning in my head. If someone wanted me dead, I would have been. If someone had done this, they were long gone. Unless they left me alive on purpose, unless they left me alone to watch me panic, to watch me run around in a panic. Someone who killed 30 people would enjoy that, wouldn't they? The chase? The game? No. I told myself firmly, that's not it. I ran through a list of plausible explanations in my head. There was no blood, no signs of trauma. They looked like they had been poisoned, really. We all ate the same thing, though. But maybe it was something in the air. Wait, carbon monoxide poisoning? Yes, that could be it. No, really, that made total sense. You hear these horror stories, right? Busted heater, whole family dead. Why not whole school class? Made much more sense than some crazed serial killer. Contrary to what all the Scandinavian noir crime novels will have you believe, Scandinavia does not have a lot of serial killers. And carbon monoxide poisoning happens. And I had spent hours outside last night, while the others were suffocating. Somewhat calmed by the rational explanation, I turned to head back down. I made a deal with myself to go back past the hut, but that I didn't have to head back inside, just to follow the road until I hit the police or some sort of civilization. I turned back around, taking in the view from up on the hill for the first time, and I got a good look at the hostel and the surrounding fields. And my perfectly rational explanation shattered along with my fragile sliver of calmness. Down there in the fields surrounding the huts, I could clearly see a perfect circle of dead brown grass. The main building where we had slept was at the very edge of it, which meant that where I had been standing last night was just outside of the circle, and inside the circle everything was dead. I don't think carbon monoxide can do that. The police were there when I came back. I honestly don't remember the details of what happened next. I doubt they would be interesting anyway. 2 things you should know though. 1, they said it was carbon monoxide poisoning, that I had somehow escaped because I was outside. Nobody said anything about the circle, not ever. When I asked, I was told to drop it. That grass sometimes dies too. The northern lights had not been visible that far south that night. In fact, they hadn't been visible anywhere on mainland Norway for weeks. My girlfriend and I are seasoned hikers. We've tackled everything from rugged mountain trails to swampy, mosquito-infested paths, and we've always made it out unscathed. But this time was different. This time, the trail almost didn't let us go. It started with a warning. I know, that sounds over the top, but it's true. The guy at the ranger station, a wiry, middle-aged man with a leathery face, looked up from his clipboard as we signed in. "You two sticking to the main trail?" He sounded like he must have smoked 4 packs a day for the last decade. "Planning on taking the loop trail up to the summit," I replied. "We have been looking into it for a while, and we think the weather's right for it this weekend. We've never been through Baroque Park before, but we've heard it's beautiful." My girlfriend curled her arm through mine and rested her cheek on my shoulder. "It's going to be great. I think he might have something special planned for us." I didn't. My smile turned nervous. The ranger hesitated, his pen hovering over the paper. Could he tell I didn't have a ring? Was he about to out me? No. He braced a hand on the counter and leaned forward, eyes serious beneath bushy eyebrows. "Stick to the marked paths. And if you hear anything strange, like a kid crying, you keep walking. Don't stop. Don't look. Just keep going." "What?" My girlfriend gave a nervous laugh. "Don't want you to get lost." The ranger's eyes didn't waver. People go looking for what they shouldn't, and not all of them come back. We decided it was just some backwoods superstition to spook tourists. What else could it be? So after we brushed off the nerves, we shouldered our packs and started up the trail. The first few hours were uneventful, just the 2 hours surrounded by towering pines, the crunch of dirt and leaves underfoot, and the occasional bird call. If you've ever been on a hike before, well, there you go. Standard day. My girlfriend kept looking over at me, eyes gone to honey. I didn't know why she thought this was a special proposal trip. It wasn't until we parked I even realized that's where her expectations were set. And my attention? Yeah, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do to cushion the blow when we hit summit. Then we heard it, a child's voice crying. We stopped dead in our tracks. Amber froze, her eyes wide. "Do you hear that?" I nodded, my stomach twisting into knots. It sounded like a little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old. "Help me," she was calling out, her voice breaking with sobs. "Please help me. Mommy? Daddy?" Her voice grew quiet with fear. "Anyone? Hello? Are you okay?" I called, my voice bouncing off the trees. The crying stopped. For a moment, the forest was silent, too silent. No wind, no birds, nothing. Then the crying started again, louder this time. "Closer. We need to check it out," Amber said, already stepping off the trail. She waved her arms to the side to keep her balance as she made her way down the incline. Every instinct I had screamed at me to stop her. "The ranger said." "Screw what the ranger said," she snapped. "If it was your kid out there, wouldn't you want someone to help?" She had a point. Against my better judgment, I followed her down the incline and into the trees. The crying led us deeper into the woods. "Help me. Someone. Please." She sounded frantic, but the further we went, the more I noticed something was off. The voice wasn't changing direction. Normally, if someone's lost, their voice shifts as they move or turn their head. But this sound, it was static, like it was coming from a fixed point. The ranger's warning came back to mind. My steps started to slow down. "Amber, I think we should go back. Something's not right. I can't find you. Please, I'm scared." The kid was sobbing now. "Stop acting like a jerk," Amber snapped. "She's got to be right ahead of us." Amber was right. 20 more feet and we saw her. She was sitting on a fallen log, her back to us, wearing a dirty pink jacket and clutching her knees to her chest. "Hey, sweetie," Amber called gently, stepping closer. "Are you lost? Where are your parents?" The girl didn't answer. She just kept crying, her shoulders shaking with each sob. "Please help me." Amber crouched down, reaching out to touch her shoulder. "Wait," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Something about this felt wrong. Why was she just sitting there? When Amber had called for her, why hadn't she tried to find us? "Amber, we should just go get the ranger. Come on." The girl's crying stopped. In one smooth, jerky motion, she turned to face us. Her eyes weren't right. They were too large, too dark, reflecting the light like an animal's. "You found me." Her mouth stretched wide into a grin that split her face unnaturally, revealing rows of sharp, needle-like teeth. "I knew you would. I knew if I called for you, you would find me." Then her entire skin began to split down the middle like a zipper dot. I didn't know what I was expecting to see underneath, but it wasn't this. It wasn't a sinewy, raw-looking creature that crawled out of its human shell like a spider shedding its exoskeleton. Amber screamed, stumbling backward. I grabbed her arm, yanking her to her feet, shouting, "Run!" so loudly it made my throat sting that we bolted, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at our faces. Behind us, I heard the creature give a low guttural growl, followed by the unmistakable sound of something running fast. It was chasing us. We hit the incline, then the trail, and didn't stop running until we burst back into Ranger Station, gasping for air. The ranger looked up from his desk, his face grim. "You heard it, didn't you?" We nodded, too shaken to speak. He sighed, getting up and locking the door. "You're lucky you ran. Most people don't." We didn't ask what he meant. We didn't want to know Dot. We've hiked dozens of trails since that day, but we've never gone back to that forest. And if we ever hear crying in the woods again, we'll keep walking. A memory is hazy, unfinished. The more I focus on it, the more it blurs, like an oil painting. It presents itself to me in fragments, eating the fish we caught over the fire, the scales black and charred, and the feeling of the small bones that poked the top of my mouth. The sound of Ma drinking from a water bottle, the way the sun stretched and laid itself over the horizon like a sleeping cat. We slept in a tent too small, really, for the three of us. More often than not, I'd wake in the dark, face damp with sweat, and try to unzip the front as quietly as possible, leaning out, gulping the cool night air like it was spring water. It was on day 3 I saw it first, a neat pile of stones to the side of the trail. The largest was at the bottom, and the stones piled on top got progressively smaller, which gave it the impression of a small tower. "Pa," I said, "what's that?" He looked at Ma, smiled. "Just a pile of stones, little one." I wasn't convinced. There was something about them, a sense of real precision that made them stand out against the random and organic bursts of shrubs and the lazy loops of mayflies in the air around them. They were so intricately balanced it felt as if even the tiniest movement could knock them over, should knock them over. A sense of tension, like a string had been pulled through the center of all of them and could be snapped at any moment. Part of me braced myself for a gust of wind or a slight tremor in the earth. Part of me wanted them to fall over, to obey the rules of our world, to indicate that they were really just a pile of stones and not part of something older, stranger. Their stillness made me hold my breath, waiting. "Pa, really," I said. "What are they? Why are they here?" He bent down, resting his huge hand on my shoulder. Sometimes people get lost. Sometimes people lose their way. There are trails out here no one should walk down. There are trails that you might find yourself walking down with no idea how or when you chose the path. And He lost the thought for a moment, found it again. These are how people find their way back. And as if to mark his words, I saw something down the left side of the fork we'd stopped at, something strange. A dark shape, still against the tall grass and leaves swaying in the breeze. As I watched, more shapes swelled and grew, figures the color of shadow and smoke gathering like some vast, impatient crowd. I felt my skin pucker, shrivel against my bones, and my mouth go dry. But I was with Ma and Pa, and I felt invincible. I asked if we could go down this trail a little bit further to see if we could see whoever was lost. It was Ma's turn to speak now. "No, little one," she said. "That is not our trail to walk down." And then she said something I couldn't hear, made some symbol in the air with the tips of her fingers, and we continued our walk. That was 16 years ago. That was before cancer made a nest in Pa's throat and grew like a hungry and scheming fungus until his bones were like a sponge. Before Ma fell headfirst into the bottle and couldn't get out, and all I could see was her legs shaking and her eyes glazed over and the cathode ray TV playing memories we no longer had to an empty room. It was easy then to forget. I forgot about the stones and the trails, and I stumbled down my own path. One that was littered with bottles and arguments that exploded like atom bombs in bathroom stalls at truck stops, and money that changed hands at 2 a.m, and people whose names I don't know or want to know hunched over some low table with a rolled note grinding their teeth and spitting yellow phlegm between their feet. I think I saw them again for the first time after I'd worked all week with Lily, and we'd saved up enough to see us through Friday night to Monday morning, and we were waiting outside Slick Pete's house, sweating, jittering. You were always nervous when you saw Slick Pete. The man was like one of those poles that supports power lines, tall everywhere, humming with some unseen and terrifying energy. I remembered a video I'd once seen on the news of the huge red seed, of the huge red seed. Of the huge red from a cut power line, the flames, the staggering sound of it all, and I felt like Slick Pete had a similar affect, a sense that if his energy was directed at you, it would eat you up, flay your skin and char your bones. He opened up the door, so tall he had to bend in the hallway, all sweat, long yellow teeth, and clean clothes. He swore at us, said something about how late it was, how even he had to sleep. We didn't really hear, of course. Eyes darting side to side, lips chapped, bills folded and pressed in the palm of my hand. He was smoking these white thin cigarettes one after the other, stubbing them on the various chrome ashtrays that littered his house. Detritus from gas stations across the country. "Welcome to Arkansas. Enjoy your stay. The nation's greatest state." He opened up the door, so tall he had to bend in the hallway, all sweat, long yellow teeth, and clean clothes. He swore at us, said something about how late it was, how even he had to sleep. We didn't really hear, of course. Eyes darting side to side, lips chapped, bills folded and pressed in the palm of my hand. He was smoking these white, thin cigarettes one after the other, stubbing them on the various chrome ashtrays that littered his house. Detritus from gas stations across the country. "Welcome to Arkansas. Enjoy your stay. The nation's greatest state." We shuffled from foot to foot as he took the money, counted it, passed us a small clear bag. We turned to walk out, both almost high with relief, when, from behind us, there was a cough. Slick Pete's eyes fixed on us. He licked his thin lips, scratched the graying beard under his chin with a huge hand. He took a step forward, his long legs bringing him only a foot or so away from us. Used his middle finger to flick up the brim of his cream cowboy hat. "This it?" I looked to Lily. She said nothing, suddenly looking so small, her vest barely covering her scabbed skin and her faded tattoos, her arms all bone and bruises. Yeah, sure. That's it. 60, like we agreed. Slick Pete took his time, reached for the pack of smokes, took one, his manicured nails pulling it from the pack with practiced ease, bit it between his front teeth. He studied us for a moment, his eyes wet and piercing under the brim of his hat. 60? Yeah, Pete. 60. Counted. He watched, waited, lit his cigarette. I started shaking. I could hear those power lines overhead snapping, coiling like black snakes. I did count it. Out loud, shit, 10 missing. I looked to Lily and I could see the guilt stretched all over her face, could see it nestled in the hollows of her cheeks and the purple bags under her eyes. She wrapped her arms around herself, picked at the flaking skin over the tattoo of a naked woman on her shoulder. My fingers tapped a silent, frantic rhythm into my thigh. I could feel fear taking root in my chest. I spoke up. Shit, Pete. I can explain. He cut me off. Which one of you was it? I bit my lip. Considered it for a moment. Me, Pete. I thought I'd get some beers, to loosen me up, wet the whistle. A Friday, man. A fucking Friday. I'm sorry. Lily had no idea, man. No idea at all. It's me who handles the... Pete turned to Lily, his neck moving like an owl's. Go on. He jerked his head in the direction of the door. Leave us. And I watched Lily leave as Slick Pete walked over and reached into a big box. He kept locked at one end of the room, and he was saying something about making this time count, making sure I wouldn't try anything so stupid next time, his voice crackling like static. And then before I knew it, I was running way out of the parking lot outside, out down the road, pelting it as fast as I could towards the woods, my body so alien to motion that it was burning up, legs screaming, and I came to a fork in the road, and there it was, a stack of stones. The largest one at the bottom, the smallest at the top, held together by some unseen force. I stopped for a moment, took a deep breath. I could hear Slick Pete somewhere behind me, the sound of his car tearing down the road, and I knew I didn't have long. But as I looked down the path marked by stones, his headlights shone through the trees, casting a white light against the base of the trunks, making the thin grass glow, and in that moment I could see them. Only one at first, 2 bright pinpoints of lights for eyes, dark, motionless, some vaguely humanoid figure, entirely still. As I watched, more gathered, drifting in like storm clouds, more pinpricks of light until the forest was teeming with them, dozens and dozens of still figures, watching. For a moment I thought I could hear them, this sea of noise, of whispers. The sight of it filled me with more terror than I can explain. I realized then that there were worse things than Slick Pete in this world, things that lurked at the gray edges of what we understood, things that were always watching, things that possessed a stillness like a calm ocean, a stillness that implies something vast and ancient and hungry underneath. That's what I thought they were. Hungry. I chose the other path, had to choose the other path, tearing away from the dark figures down the road, and I ran until my legs gave up. Ran until Slick Pete's dog caught me and made sure I walked with a limp. And then Slick Pete caught up and made damn sure that limp was permanent. And even now, after all these years, if I catch myself in the mirror, I can see all Slick Pete did that night. The scarce and the way one my hips pops at the wrong angle. So I avoided the piles of stones. I began to shift to skip town whenever I saw one, the memory of those things in the forest haunting me. It was the sense, I think, that they were waiting for me. That was what terrified me so much, the sense that this unknown force was tempting me, luring me to places unknown. I knew what men like Slick Pete would do if they caught me, and I had the scars to prove it, but I had no clue, no idea what would happen if I walked down the path the figures wanted me to. It was also the mystery that surrounded them. In the same way that they seemed as if they could topple over at any moment, they seemed so alien wherever they appeared. On street corners in bustling cities, at the top of stairs in a train station, in the middle of nowhere in the woods. There was a sense that whoever was making them was a step ahead of me, unseen, watching. Once I even found them in the hallway of a derelict house. I was squatting and had to leave. I couldn't help but picture a strange, dark figure silently balancing the stones as I slept. Sometimes I wouldn't notice until too late, and then I'd see them, watching, and I'd be filled with such a sense of fear that I almost couldn't move. These figures still and watching in shop windows at the edge of roads at night, lurking behind trees and trucks and between rusted sheets of corrugated iron. And all the time I ran, I lost more and more of myself. Gave up on my name after a while, didn't need it, let my grief sow seeds of its own in my bones. Found myself with hot tears on my cheeks, sleeping in empty dumpsters, abandoned trains, the dry doorways of shops. I felt, at a point, as if I was close to the end. In the same way something circles the drain, I could tell my loops were getting shorter. I cared less, spent less time in places before I saw the figures, the stones that now dictated my every waking moment. I'd fallen into the bottle like Ma and then some, and I could feel a rot in my core like Pa, and I was all rags and bruises and split lips. It must have been a year or so after Slick Pete took the use of my good leg. We'd just come into a little money, me and a few others who slept under a bridge in a town I didn't know the name of. We found a briefcase full of expensive Italian suits, all tailored and crisp, and had managed to find someone who was willing to buy them, no questions asked, and we'd agreed to split the money 3 ways. I'd decided what I was going to do with mine. I was going to buy one last bottle, one last bag, and then I was going to make my way down the stone path. I was going to follow those stones until I met the dark figures who stared out at me, the dark figures who terrified me so much I sometimes wouldn't sleep, just gnash my teeth and pull at my hair and imagine them swarming, like bats or crows or flies, swarming and smothering me until I couldn't breathe or move, just lie there, eyes pinned open, gasping for air. And that's exactly what I did. I spent all my money one afternoon as the light turned to the thin film of evening, gathered my courage in the shop's bathroom, talking to a figure I didn't recognize in the mirror, and then I walked. I walked for an hour or so until I saw one of those little piles of rocks that had followed me around the country, and I took a moment to ready myself. I was struggling to keep my balance, swaying, staggering, clutching an empty bottle like some sort of life ring. I took a moment and then, catching myself by surprise, fighting every instinct in my body, I walked down the path they marked. I do not know what I expected. I can't really remember what I expected either. I could see the first figure at the end, the color of smoke, watching, and as I walked, accepting the end, praying for the end, more of the figures flocked to me. Like carrion to a wounded animal, they began to surround me, filling the space between objects and then appearing from the objects until I could see in front of me was a long path, and each side was completely blanketed in shadows that watched. I thought that the stones might have indicated that this was where I was going to die, that this was the end, until I remembered what Paul said. They're for people who lost their way, and then I could hear his voice speaking low and slow. They're how you find your way back. When I turned around to see how far I'd come, I could see for a moment a figure at the start of the path, swaying slightly on the spot, clutching a bottle in one hand like a life. And so I followed them, those strange stacks of stones, followed them all the way across the country, to the black rocks of the mountains and back, into the houses of strangers who opened their hearts to me and fed me, and I followed them to beaches at midnight and vast pine forests, and I followed them when I was angry and upset and alone, and I followed them when I was full of love, and my mind rang clear like a bell. And then one day I met someone who was following them, each other head first, entangled our limbs and tasted the salt of each other's lips and skin. I decided what I was going to do with mine. I was going to buy one last bottle, one last bag, and then I was going to make my way down the stone path. I was going to follow those stones until I met the dark figures who stared out at me. The dark figures who terrified me so much I sometimes wouldn't sleep, just gnash my teeth and pull at my hair and imagine them swarming, like bats or crows or flies, swarming and smothering me until I couldn't breathe or move, just lie there, eyes pinned open, gasping for air. And that's exactly what I did. I spent all my money one afternoon as the light turned to the thin film of evening, gathered my courage in a shop's bathroom, talking to a figure I didn't recognize in the mirror, and then I walked. I walked for an hour or so until I saw one of those little piles of rocks that had followed me around the country, and I took a moment to ready myself. I was struggling to keep my balance, swaying, staggering, clutching an empty bottle like some sort of life ring. I took a moment and then, catching myself by surprise, fighting every instinct in my body, I walked down the path they marked dot. I do not know what I expected. I can't really remember what I expected either. I could see the first figure at the end, the color of smoke, watching. And as I walked, accepting the end, praying for the end, more of the figures flocked to me. Like carrion to a wounded animal, they began to surround me, filling the space between objects and then appearing from the objects until I could see in front of me was a long path, and each side was completely blanketed in shadows that watched. I thought that the stones might have indicated that this was where I was going to die, that this was the end, until I remembered what Paul said, they're for people who lost their way. And then I could hear his voice, speaking low and slow, they're how you find your way back. When I turned around to see how far I'd come, I could see for a moment a figure at the start of the path, swaying slightly on the spot, clutching a bottle in one hand like a life ring. And so I followed them, those strange stacks of stones, followed them all the way across the country, to the black rocks of the mountains and back into the houses of strangers who opened their hearts to me and fed me. And I followed them to beaches at midnight in vast pine forests. And I followed them when I was angry and upset and alone. And I followed them when I was full of love, and my mind rang clear like a bell. And then one day I met someone who was following them. My mind rang clear like a bell. And then one day I met someone who was following them. Each other head first, entangled our limbs, and tasted the salt of each other's lips and skin.